We've all had those teachers, right? The ones who could handle anything, like the energy, the chaos, just all the emotions of a classroom. But have you ever really thought about how much work, like real unseen effort, goes into managing those emotions? I mean, on top of everything else they have to do.
Yeah, it's a lot. It really is. And that's what we're diving into today, the emotional labor of teaching.
We are. And this isn't just like anecdotal. We're going deep with a huge review and meta-analysis that brings together tons of research on this.
It's a really comprehensive look. A lot of what we know about this hidden side of teaching.
And for you, I mean, someone who spends so much time thinking about how we learn and interact, this is going to be like extra fascinating.
Definitely. Because we've all seen those emotional dynamics in schools.
Right.
Whether we were students or we're around education now, this deep dive is going to give us a whole new way to understand what's going on for teachers, beneath the surface.
Absolutely. So before we get into the specifics, let's define our terms here. What exactly is emotional labor?
It's a term that was actually first used by a sociologist named Hochschild back in the 80s. And it basically describes how we manage our feelings to create a specific, outward display. And it's often about the difference between what we're feeling inside and what we feel we need to show others.
So for teachers, it's not just about teaching the material. It's about managing their own emotions and the emotions of like 30 kids at the same time.
Exactly. And doing it in a way that creates a positive and productive learning environment.
So what's the roadmap for this deep dive? Where are we headed?
We're going to break this down into three key parts. First, we'll look at the why. What are the factors that lead teachers to engage in this emotional work in the first place? What are the things that drive it? These are the antecedents.
Okay, the why. Then what?
Then we'll dive into the how.
Yeah.
The actual strategies that teachers use to manage their emotions on the job. This can range from things like putting on a brave face to actually trying to change how they feel inside. Like really getting into the role.
So the why, the how, and
And finally, and probably most importantly, we'll explore the impact, the consequences of all this emotional work. How does it affect their well-being, their careers, their overall experience as teachers?
got it. The why, the how, and the so what. And you mentioned this is a meta-analysis. What does that actually mean for how reliable this information is?
A meta-analysis is like, well, think of it this way. If you want to understand something really complex, you don't just look at one study.
Right.
You look at a whole bunch of them.
Makes sense.
A meta-analysis does exactly that. It takes the findings from many individual studies, even hundreds sometimes, and uses statistics to combine them, to look for overall trends, to make the conclusions more reliable.
So it's like getting the big picture, the most accurate view of what the research really says.
Exactly. So in our case, it helps us see more clearly how these different strategies that teachers use to manage their emotions are linked to things like their mental health, their job satisfaction, and their overall experience as a teacher. And to make sure we're all on the same page, let's define some key terms related to emotional labor.
Okay, let's do it. Where do we start?
Well, when researchers talk about emotional labor, they often talk about three main approaches, three ways teachers manage their emotions. And the first one is surface acting.
Surface acting. Okay. What's that?
Imagine, a teacher who's having a really tough day. Maybe they're feeling frustrated or overwhelmed, but they have to keep it together for their students,
Right.
right? So they put on a smile, they act cheerful and enthusiastic, even though inside they're feeling something totally different. They might amplify a little bit of joy or tamp down some, annoyance, but their internal feelings haven't changed.
So it's like putting on a mask. You're showing one emotion on the outside, even if you're feeling something else entirely on the inside.
Exactly. And it's something that we all do to some extent in our lives, right? We all have times when we have to manage our emotions to fit the situation. But for teachers, it can be a really big part of their daily work. Then there's deep acting. This is when the teacher actually tries to change their internal feelings to match the emotions they need to express. So instead of just faking it, they're actively working to feel the emotion they need to show.
That sounds so much harder.
It can be. It's about shifting your mindset, trying to genuinely empathize with your students, putting yourself in their shoes, and really trying to connect with the emotion you want to express.
So, for example, if a student is struggling, instead of just acting patient, the teacher is working to actually feel patient.
Exactly. It's more about regulating those internal feelings, not just the outward expression. And then there's the idea of genuinely expressing emotions. And this might seem obvious or straightforward, but even when a teacher's expressing what they genuinely feel, there's still this layer of professional consideration. They have to think about how to express those emotions in a way that's appropriate for the classroom context.
So it's not just about letting it all hang out.
Right. It's about finding a balance between being authentic and being professional.
Yeah.
You can't just react impulsively to every emotion you feel as a teacher.
Right, there's a filter there, even with genuine emotions.
Exactly. And to understand the whole picture of emotional labor, we have to think about how these individual strategies fit into a larger framework. And one really helpful model comes from the work of Alicia Grande, a researcher who's done a lot of work on emotional labor.
What does her model tell us?
Well, it suggests that emotional labor isn't just about the individual teacher and their choices. It's also about the context they're working in. So things like their personality, their motivations, their abilities, those all come into play.
That's the individual side.
Right. But then you also have contextual factors, things like how much autonomy they have in their classroom, the support they receive from colleagues and administrators, the overall school climate. All of these things influence how much emotional labor teachers have to do and what strategies they use.
It's like a two-way street. The teacher brings their own stuff to the table, but the environment also shapes how they manage their emotions.
Exactly. And the consequences of that emotional labor, in turn, affect both the teacher and the organization,
Mm.
the school. It affects their well-being, their job satisfaction, their effectiveness as a teacher. It's all connected.
So it's not just about, like, feelings. It has real, tangible implications for how teachers function and how well schools function.
Absolutely. And to study all of this, researchers need ways to actually measure these different types of emotional labor, to figure out how much teachers are using each strategy. And one of the most commonly used tools is the emotional labor scale developed by Deffendorf and his colleagues.
Okay, what does that scale measure?
It's designed to assess how much teachers engage in each of those three strategies we talked about: surface acting, deep acting, and genuine emotion expression. And one of the things that makes this scale so valuable is that it's been used in a lot of different professions, not just teaching. So it allows researchers to compare findings across different fields and see if there are any patterns.
So we can see how teachers' emotional labor compares to, say, nurses or salespeople or other professions that involve a lot of emotion management.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned earlier that emotional labor is different from some other related concepts, like emotional intelligence. Could you remind us what that distinction is?
Sure, emotional intelligence is a broader concept. It's about understanding and managing emotions, both your own and others, in a way that helps you navigate life and relationships effectively.
Right. It's like this overall skill set you have in dealing with emotions.
And emotional labor is more specific. It's about managing your emotions in the context of your job. It's about meeting those display rules, those expectations for how you should act emotionally in a professional setting.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that research has found there's not a super strong connection between those two things. Like, you can be really emotionally intelligent, but still engage in a lot of surface acting if your job requires it. Or you might not be as emotionally intelligent, but find yourself in a job where you can be more genuine with your emotions.
So emotional intelligence might help you manage emotions better overall, but it doesn't necessarily mean you won't have to do emotional labor.
Right. It's about the context.
Uh-huh.
And it's also about the specific demands of the job. What about emotional regulation? We talked about that earlier, too. How is that different from emotional labor?
Well, emotional regulation is even broader than emotional intelligence. It's basically any way we try to influence our emotions, whether it's calming ourselves down when we're stressed, trying to be more optimistic, or getting ourselves pumped up for a challenge. It's like all the tools we have in our emotional toolkit.
It's all the ways we try to shape and manage our emotional experience.
And emotional labor is just a subset of that. It's about regulating emotions specifically for the purpose of meeting those workplace display rules.
Yeah, so all emotional labor involves emotion regulation.
Right. But not all emotion regulation is emotional labor.
Exactly. Think of it like this. Emotion regulation is like having a toolbox full of ways to manage your feelings. And emotional labor is like you're at work and your boss says, okay, for this job, you need to use these specific tools, even if you'd rather use some others.
Got it. So we've got those definitions squared away. Now let's dig into the why of emotional labor. What drives teachers to do this emotional work in the first place? What factors contribute to it?
Okay, so there are two main categories of factors we need to consider. Individual differences, which are basically things about the teachers themselves, their characteristics, and then contextual factors, things about the environment they're working in.
Sounds good. Let's start with the individual side. What are some of those teacher-specific factors?
Well, like we talked about with emotional intelligence, personality plays a big role. So, for example, teachers who score higher on measures of neuroticism, which is basically a tendency to experience negative emotions like anxiety and worry, they tend to use more surface acting.
So if you're more prone to anxiety, you might be more likely to put on that brave face even if you're feeling stressed underneath.
Exactly. And on the flip side, teachers who are higher in openness to experience, those who are curious, imaginative, open to new ideas, they tend to use more deep acting. They're more likely to try to actually shift their internal state to match the emotions they need to show.
Yeah.
And both agreeableness and openness to experience have been linked to more genuine expression of emotion. So it's like those personality traits kind of set the stage for how teachers approach emotional labor.
That makes sense. Our personalities definitely influence how we deal with emotions in general, so it makes sense that they would also influence how we manage emotions at work.
Absolutely. And then there's the idea of like how consistent these emotional tendencies are for a person. Some research has shown that teachers who like generally tend to be more inauthentic with their emotions, like they tend to hide or fake their feelings in various situations, those teachers are also more likely to do that in their classrooms. It's like it becomes a bit of a pattern for them.
So it's not just about the situation, it's also about the person's overall tendency to regulate their emotions in a certain way.
Exactly. And their general mood and how they typically feel on a day-to-day basis also seems to matter. This is what researchers call emotional affectivity. Some people are just naturally more positive or more negative,
I can definitely relate to that.
right? We all know people who are just like generally more upbeat and cheerful, and then others who are more prone to feeling down or grumpy. And those tendencies seem to influence how teachers approach emotional labor too.
So how does that play out in the classroom?
Well, teachers who generally experience more positive emotions tend to use more deep acting. They're more likely to try to connect with those positive feelings and let them guide their interactions with students. On the other hand, teachers who tend to experience more negative emotions are more likely to rely on surface acting. It's like they're trying to mask those negative feelings to maintain that professional composure.
So if you're feeling stressed or frustrated, you might be more likely to just put on that fake smile instead of trying to actually change how you feel.
Exactly. And when we look at specific emotions, like how much teachers enjoy their work or how much anger and anxiety they feel on the job, we see some interesting patterns too. Lower enjoyment and higher levels of negative emotions, like anger and anxiety, are linked to more emotional dissonance, that mismatch between what you feel and what you have to express.
An emotional dissonance, that's not a good thing, right?
Not really. It can be pretty draining to constantly feel like you're putting on an act. And research has specifically linked surface acting to lower enjoyment and more negative emotions,
Mm.
while deep acting is often associated with a more positive overall emotional state.
So it's like a vicious cycle. If you're feeling bad and you just keep faking it, it might make you feel even worse in the long run. But if you can actually tap into some genuine positive emotions, it might help you feel better overall.
Exactly. And this brings us to another crucial individual difference: motivation.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
Huge. And research has found that teachers who are really driven by a sense of public service, who are
Hmm.
committed to their students' well-being, they tend to engage in more deep acting and less surface acting. It's like their dedication to their students fuels their emotional engagement.
They're not just going through the motions.
Right. They're really invested in creating a positive and supportive learning environment for their students, and that seems to drive them to connect with those genuine emotions. Intrinsic motivation, which is like that internal drive to do something because you find it rewarding, that seems to be important too. Teachers who are intrinsically motivated to teach well, they're more likely to put in the effort to express those emotions through deep acting.
Mhm.
It's about wanting to do it well, not just because you have to.
So passion for teaching matters.
It really does. Then we have instructional self-efficacy. This is basically how confident a teacher feels in their ability to teach effectively.
That confidence thing again?
It comes up a lot, right? And it makes sense. If you feel confident in your ability to manage your classroom, engage your students, and get them excited about learning, you're probably going to feel more comfortable being yourself, being authentic. And that's what the research suggests. Teachers with higher instructional self-efficacy, they tend to use more deep acting and express their genuine emotions more readily.
Because they feel more secure in their role.
Exactly. They don't feel like they have to put up as many walls.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't forget about emotional intelligence. Teachers with higher emotional intelligence, they're also more likely to use deep acting and genuine emotion expression. They're more in tune with their emotions and better able to manage them in a way that's beneficial for both themselves and their students.
Okay, so those are some of the big individual differences that shape how teachers approach emotional labor. What about the contextual side? What factors in the work environment contribute to all of this?
Well, one of the biggest ones is emotional display rules. These are those often unspoken rules about what emotions are considered appropriate to show in a particular setting. Like in some jobs, it's okay to express anger or frustration openly, but in others, it's not.
It's about fitting into the culture of the workplace.
Exactly. And schools definitely have their own emotional display rules. For teachers, there's often this expectation that they need to be positive, upbeat, and encouraging, even when they're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. And that can lead to a lot of surface acting.
Because I feel like they have to hide those negative emotions.
Right. And if the school culture really emphasizes the importance of expressing positive emotions, that can lead to more deep acting. It's like teachers are trying to internalize those positive feelings to meet the expectations of the school environment. It's like a performance almost.
So the school climate sets the stage for how teachers manage their emotions.
Totally. And then you have emotional job demands, which is a fancy way of saying how much emotional stuff teachers have to deal with on a regular basis. This includes things like how often they have to interact with students who are having emotional problems, how much conflict they have to manage, how much pressure they feel to meet academic standards.
Basically, how emotionally draining their job is.
Exactly. And unsurprisingly, higher emotional job demands are linked to more emotional labor overall. And this isn't just about surface acting. Some studies have actually found that higher emotional demands can lead to increases in all three types of emotional labor: surface acting, deep acting, and genuine expression. It's like teachers are drawing on all of their emotional resources to cope with the demands of the job.
So it's not just about hiding negative emotions. It's about managing a whole range of emotions in a really demanding environment.
Exactly. And finally, the overall school climate. That kind of ties all of this together. When teachers feel like they work in a supportive environment, where there's good communication, trust between colleagues, and a shared sense of purpose, they tend to use more deep acting and less surface acting. They're more likely to feel comfortable being themselves and connecting with those genuine emotions.
Because they feel safe and respected.
Exactly. And that psychological safety is so important for well-being. And of course, it all ties back to those positive student-teacher relationships we were talking about earlier. It all creates this more positive feedback loop.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in terms of the why behind teachers' emotional labor. Now let's shift gears and talk about the impact. What are the consequences of all this emotional management? What does the research tell us about how it affects teachers?
The consequences can be significant, and they touch on various aspects of teachers' lives. But the most researched area is definitely the impact on their psychological well-being. And one of the key findings is that emotional dissonance, remember, that gap between what you feel and what you have to express, that's linked to higher levels of burnout and lower job satisfaction.
Which makes sense. If you're constantly putting on an act, it's bound to take a toll.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's exhausting. And when we look at the specific types of emotional labor, surface acting consistently emerges as the most problematic. Studies have linked it to increased stress, lower job satisfaction, and like you said, higher rates of burnout.
So faking it till you make it might not be the best strategy for a teacher's mental health.
It doesn't seem to be.
Mm.
And it's not just about burnout in general. Surface acting is also linked to specific components of burnout, like emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and a reduced sense of personal accomplishment. It's like you're draining your emotional batteries without recharging them. And even faking positive emotions specifically has been linked to negative outcomes.
Wow, so even if you're faking it in a seemingly positive way, it can still be harmful.
They can. And we have to remember that this relationship between emotional labor and well-being can be a two-way street. Feeling burned out can lead to more surface acting, and more surface acting can lead to more burnout. It's like a vicious cycle.
So what about deep acting? Is that a healthier strategy?
Well, it's more complicated. Some studies have found that deep acting is linked to better well-being, like greater job satisfaction and lower burnout. But other studies have found the opposite, or no relationship at all. And the meta-analysis we talked about earlier, when they looked at all the studies together, they found no overall significant relationship between deep acting and well-being.
So the jury's still out on deep acting.
Kind of. It seems like it might be beneficial in some cases, but it also requires a lot of effort to constantly regulate your emotions, and that effort might sometimes outweigh the benefits.
So it's not a guaranteed win. What about expressing genuine emotions? How does that affect teachers?
That's where we tend to see more consistently positive outcomes. Expressing genuine positive emotions, like joy, enthusiasm, and care for your students, that seems to be linked to lower stress, higher job satisfaction, and lower burnout. But expressing genuine negative emotions, like anger or frustration, even if they're justified, that can sometimes be linked to poorer well-being.
It's about finding that balance, expressing yourself authentically, but also managing those negative emotions in a healthy way.
Exactly. And it's not just about mental health. Emotional labor also seems to affect teachers' physical health and how engaged they are in their work.
Really? In what way?
Well, some research has found that better physical health is linked to expressing fewer genuine negative emotions, less faking, and less hiding of emotions.
So being more authentic might actually be good for your physical health.
It might. And there's also some evidence that surface acting is linked to higher levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone.
So faking it can actually be stressful on a physiological level.
Again, too. Deep acting didn't seem to have that same effect in the studies that looked at cortisol.
Interesting. So faking it is stressful, but trying to actually change how you feel might not be.
That's what the research seems to suggest. And then there's the impact on work engagement. Teachers who engage in more surface acting tend to be less engaged in their teaching. They're less enthusiastic, less invested. And, on the other hand, teachers who engage in more deep acting or express their genuine emotions more often, they tend to be more engaged, more motivated, and even more effective in their teaching.
It's like their emotions fuel their work.
Absolutely. It's not just about going through the motions. It's about bringing your whole self to the job.
So emotional labor clearly has a big impact on teachers, but are there things that can help them cope with the demands and maybe even lessen the negative effects?
That's a great question. And that's where moderators come in. Moderators are basically factors that can influence the relationship between emotional labor and its outcomes. They can either make the negative effects worse or buffer against them.
Okay, so what are some of the things that can act as moderators in this case?
Well, emotional intelligence is a big one, and it's a little more complex than you might think. Some research suggests that higher emotional intelligence might actually amplify the link between emotional job demands and surface acting.
Really? How does that work?
It might be because teachers who are more emotionally intelligent are more aware of the emotional demands of their job, and they're also more skilled at managing their emotions. So they might be more likely to use surface acting as a way to cope with those demands.
So in a way, they're using surface acting more strategically.
It's possible, but emotional intelligence can also be a protective factor. Teachers with higher emotional intelligence might be less susceptible to the negative effects of emotional labor on their well-being. They might be better able to manage those internal conflicts and find ways to recharge their emotional batteries.
So emotional intelligence is a double-edged sword in a way. It can make the demands more salient, but it can also help you cope with them more effectively.
Exactly. And then you have other factors that can act as moderators too. Positive attitudes, for example, can help buffer against the negative effects of surface acting on job satisfaction. If you generally have a more optimistic outlook, you might be less affected by the emotional drain of faking it.
The positive attitude always helps, right?
It seems to. And psychological capital, which is like a combination of self-efficacy, resilience, hope, and optimism, that can also be a protective factor. Teachers with high psychological capital, they're better able to bounce back from setbacks, they're more persistent in the face of challenges, and they're more likely to see the positive side of things. And all of that can help them cope with the demands of emotional labor.
It's like having that inner strength to draw on when things get tough.
Absolutely.
Mm.
But it's not all rosy. Some research has found that a really strong belief in one's ability to motivate students can actually make the link between deep acting and exhaustion stronger.
Really? Why would that be?
It might be because those teachers are putting a lot of pressure on themselves to constantly be on emotionally. They're really invested in getting their students excited about learning, and that can be emotionally draining, even if they're drawing on genuine emotions.
It's like the pressure to be super teacher all the time.
Exactly. And that's why social support is so crucial. Having supportive colleagues and administrators, people you can talk to, vent to, and get advice from, that can make a huge difference. Research has shown that social support can weaken the link between emotional labor and burnout.
So it's not just about individual coping mechanisms, it's also about having that support network.
Totally. And that highlights the importance of creating a school culture where teachers feel comfortable reaching out for help and supporting each other. Now, there's also been some research on gender differences in emotional labor, but the findings have been a bit mixed. Some studies have found that male teachers might engage in more surface acting and experience more exhaustion as a result. But other studies haven't found those same patterns, so more research is definitely needed in this area.
Okay, so we've got this complex picture of emotional labor, its consequences, and the factors that can moderate those consequences. Now let's bring it back to that meta-analysis we talked about at the beginning. What are the big takeaways from all that research?
Well, the meta-analysis really confirmed a lot of what we've been talking about. Like, it showed a clear and consistent negative relationship between surface acting and well-being. So all those studies that found that faking it is bad for you, the meta-analysis supports that conclusion.
Makes sense.
And it also showed a consistent positive relationship between genuine emotion expression and well-being. So being authentic, expressing those genuine positive emotions, that seems to be good for teachers.
Which is encouraging, but what about deep acting?
That's where things get really interesting. The meta-analysis actually found no overall significant relationship between deep acting and well-being.
So trying to actually change how you feel, it doesn't seem to have a clear positive or negative impact.
Exactly. It's not a magic bullet.
Yeah.
And it might be that the benefits and drawbacks of deep acting kind of balance each other out in the long run. But one of the most fascinating findings from the meta-analysis was the role of culture.
Culture. Okay, tell me about that.
So in studies conducted in Eastern cultures, like China, Japan, Korea, deep acting was actually linked to better well-being.
Wow, so the opposite of what we might expect based on some of the other research.
Exactly. But in studies conducted in Western cultures, like the US, Canada, Europe, the link between deep acting and well-being was negative.
So there's a clear cultural difference in how deep acting is experienced and how it affects well-being.
Absolutely. And this might be because different cultures have different norms and values around emotional expression. In more collectivist cultures, like many Eastern cultures, there's often a greater emphasis on social harmony, on putting the needs of the group above the needs of the individual. It's about maintaining those social bonds. Exactly. And in those cultures, deep acting might be seen as a way to achieve that harmony. It's about putting the needs of your students first, even if it means suppressing your own feelings. And that might actually be beneficial for well-being in those contexts. But more individualistic cultures, like many Western cultures, there's more emphasis on authenticity, on expressing your true self.
So deep acting might feel more inauthentic in those cultures.
Right. It might feel like you're not being true to yourself, which can be psychologically taxing. But we need more research to really understand these cultural differences.
It's a fascinating area to explore.
Totally. And the meta-analysis also highlighted something else that's really important. The specific scale that researchers use to measure emotional labor can actually influence the findings. Studies that use the Defendorf scale, the one we talked about earlier, they tended to find a positive link between deep acting and well-being. But studies that used other scales often found a negative or non-significant link. And the negative link between surface acting and well-being was stronger in studies that used scales other than the Defendorf scale.
So how we measure these things matters.
It really does. And it's not entirely clear why we see these differences. It could be that different scales are capturing slightly different aspects of emotional labor, or it could be that the Defendorf scale is better at capturing the positive aspects of deep acting, or maybe it's more sensitive to cultural differences in how deep acting is experienced. We need more research to figure all of this out. And it's also worth noting that the Defendorf scale was used more frequently in studies with teachers from Chinese and Turkish backgrounds, so there could be some overlap with those cultural findings as well.
It's like a reminder that research is always evolving, and we have to be careful about how we interpret the findings.
Exactly. But one encouraging thing is that the meta-analysis didn't find any strong evidence of publication bias, which is when studies with positive findings are more likely to get published than studies with negative findings. So, we can be fairly confident that the overall patterns we're seeing are real and not just a result of biased publishing practices.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about what emotional labor is, why teachers do it, how they do it, the impact it has on them, and even some of the complexities and nuances of the research. So, as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the key takeaways? What should we remember about teachers' emotional labor?
I think the biggest takeaway is that teaching is an emotionally demanding job, and teachers are constantly managing their emotions to create a positive learning environment for their students. And this emotional work is shaped by a whole range of factors, from their own personalities to the school climate to the broader cultural context. There's this constant interplay between the individual and the environment.
It's not just about the teacher, and it's not just about the school. It's about all of those things coming together.
Exactly. And we've also seen that surface acting, that faking it, it's consistently linked to negative outcomes for teachers. It's stressful, it's draining, and it can contribute to burnout. Deep acting, on the other hand, is more complex. It might have some benefits, but it can also be taxing. And the research isn't entirely clear on whether it's a good or bad thing overall. And then there's genuine expression of emotion, which seems to be the most beneficial, especially when it comes to expressing positive emotions.
So authenticity is key.
Absolutely. But even with genuine expression, there's still that element of professional judgment. Teachers have to think about how to express their emotions in a way that's appropriate for the classroom context. And this is all complicated by the fact that emotional labor is often seen as a necessary part of teaching. It's what good teachers do. They manage their emotions to create a positive learning experience for their students. And that can create this tension where teachers feel like they have to prioritize their students' needs over their own well-being.
It's like a selfless profession in a way.
It can be.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important to talk about emotional labor, to acknowledge the demands, and to find ways to support teachers. And that support can come from a lot of different places, like colleagues, administrators, professional development programs, even just having more open conversations about the emotional challenges of teaching.
So it's about creating a culture where teachers feel supported and valued, both emotionally and professionally.
Exactly. And one of the things that I find really hopeful is that some research suggests that teachers who are more emotionally intelligent might be better equipped to navigate these challenges. They might be able to use surface acting more strategically when it's necessary without experiencing the same negative consequences.
So emotional intelligence can be a protective factor.
It seems to be. And that suggests that we can help teachers develop those skills, those emotional regulation skills. They can help them thrive in this demanding profession. But there's still so much we don't know about emotional labor. Like, we need more research that looks at the long-term effects of emotional labor on teachers. We need more research that looks at the impact on student outcomes. We need more research that explores the cultural differences in emotional labor. And we need more research that looks at how different school policies and practices can support teachers' emotional well-being. There's a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. But even with all that we still don't know, this deep dive has really highlighted how important it is to understand the emotional world of teaching. It's not just about the academics, it's about the human beings at the heart of the profession.